Welcome back, you filthy exiles. It's looking like a very interesting 3.13 league ahead of us. Obviously, it's out in the next 3 days, and I thought I'd get started with a build guide curation video to give you 5 ideas of what to play. Now, bearing in mind, I am not mentioning any Necromancer builds whatsoever because we're still pending the gem patch notes tomorrow morning. And I'm pretty sure that Necromancers and minions as a whole are going to get absolutely destroyed in the patch changes. But the builds that I've picked are pretty solid builds. I don't expect any huge changes to them. With the Ascendancy changes that came out today, they won't be catastrophic or even really hit at all. And in fact, there's probably going to be some decent power spikes that you're going to see in them. Anyway, let's get into this 5 league starters for the Ritual League. Okay, so the first build that we've got here is from Navandis Gaming, and it's the max block Lacererate Gladiator. So what you can basically see on screen is he's basically running a one-handed siege axe, running around with a big fuck off shield, and absolutely slaying everything. Now, the best part about this build is because this is a bossing league, this build is perfectly geared into taking bosses down for a relatively cheap budget. Now, when I say cheap, you know, a few hundred chaos, you know, let's be realistic here. Now, basically, in his POB, he's basically laid out all the leveling startup abilities, skills, everything. And he's also got a write-up on the notes on how to use the build, how to set it up, how to do it, the basic weapons that you'll need, and everything to it. I've personally played max block gladiators in the past. They're incredibly powerful. This one in particular uses a surrender, which drops from breach encounters. And the best thing about that is basically every time you block, and this build gets up to, from what I can see here, 75% block chance. So, you know, 3 out of every 4 hits technically is going to get blocked. And when you use a surrender tower shield, you also hit and proc Reckoning, and then basically claw back 250 life. You get a shit ton of armor, and yeah. Now, basically, from what I can see in the Ascendancy changes, this hasn't been hit. It's very likely that Lacerate will receive buffs, though we won't know until first thing in the morning. But this is an absolutely very viable build for bossing, for doing all content in the game and doing it safely, and you can take this into hardcore mode too and do quite well in hardcore as well. Now, the other thing is DPS on the tree so far is 3.2. That's where he's gotten it to. What you'll see in the POB, what you'll see in the description below is I actually have 2 POBs. I did go and do a fair bit of research into this, and there is a variant that uses Paradoxica Val Rapier, and that will get up to 25 million DPS as opposed to the 3.2 in Navandis' tree. So give that one a shot if you really want to challenge yourself and see where you can go with this build. Okay, so the second build we've got here is Play Like Jay's Vortex Occultist. Now, someone keeps hammering me in the comments about, oh, Jorgen, are you going to curate a frost build or an ice build? Rah, rah. Alright, here you go. You get it. So essentially with this build is you run around, drop your Vortex, everything dies, does about 1 million cold dot that is. You got just close to 10,000 EHP. And really the only item that he's got on here is the Heretic's Veiled Decide Mask, and that's pretty much it. It essentially can do everything in the game, at least at this stage. Excellent boss DPS, as you can see there. He's just sort of creaming through the Minotaur. He's like, yeah, you know, you can hit me all you want. The Occultist is quite lucrative when it comes to cold damage and dot and pretty much everything, without being an overly played skill set as well. So if anything, and looking at the Ascendancy, this is most likely looking at a buff, if anything. Because it's not necessarily the most played skill in the game, but it's a relatively reliable one, and one that you'll be able to take into bossing and not worry about losing all your XP every time you go against the Maven. Now, his guide is very well paced, very well spoken, very thorough, and if you watch his videos, he's actually got a link to a beginner's guide for this as well. As an overall, definitely give this one a shot if you want to play a frost build, something that's going to get you through. If you want to play a witch, and if you really just want to have a cruisy experience this league without too much fuss, this is going to be the build for you. Okay, so the third build that I'm going to feature here is Crouching Tuna's Toxic Rain Miner. Now, looking at this build, he's actually done this in SSF, and he's got a full notes right up in his path of building, which you'll see in the description. But basically, how Toxic Mine works is you run around, you drop mines, you trigger them, and it fires Toxic Rain, and Toxic Rain does a shit ton of dot damage. Now, the tree that he's got here is very starter friendly, and it's actually getting just close to 1,000,000 dot. You can push it up to all different sorts of levels of crazy, but as you can see on screen, he's just mincing through content. I've played a Toxic Rain bow character in the last league, and it was incredibly powerful, high levels of evasion. You can pretty much do all content, and in fact, he did Cyrus A8 by day 3, based on what he's saying in his write-up, and he was doing T16 maps by day 2 with this build. So absolutely perfectly viable for a league starter build, nice and cheap to level up and gear, and yeah, overall a pretty reliable build. And in fact, the guide that he's put together is quite well put together, and again, just nice and steady and informative as far as the information he's provided in the tree build out. He's given you a lot of notes about, you know, mapping, how to craft, yeah, pretty much how the gems interact with the build and everything else that you might need to know. So definitely give this one a shot if you want to try Chaos Dot character this league. Okay, so the next build that I'm going to feature is Big Duck's Poison BV Assassin. Now, this was a huge build in the last league, and you know, there's a very high likelihood that this is going to hit in some way, shape or form, but I very highly doubt that it's going to get hit hard enough to knock it down a peg. Dot damage, as you've seen with pretty much every one of these builds, is in fact every one of these builds is a dot based build, because as a league starter it's an incredibly powerful damage attribute, and there's no exception to this one. Now, Blade Vortex, or the Assassin class as itself, didn't really cop very much nerfing at all, and in fact Elusive, from what I could see, got buffed up. Which means I am reasonably certain that they're just not really going to be able to buff, to nerf Blade Vortex enough to make it not playable. Now, this tree in particular gets up to about 9.5 million DPS, and really the most difficult items to get here are going to be 2 Cold Iron points and a Devouring Diadem, which will drop from the, was it the Mastermind? From the Syndicate missions. Outside of that, there's nothing really crazy about this build as far as gearing goes. The hardest thing in the jewel section that you're going to have to acquire will be a large cluster jewel with Wicked Pole and Overwhelming Malice, but that's pretty much it. Taking down Cyrus, as you can see here, is pretty much a breeze with this build, and yeah. Now, I have actually put together a couple of builds with this one, so as in I've compilated a couple of builds, so MBX actually did quite a good build with this as well, and if you want to follow his build, I think he went pure physical, as opposed to running poison, and where if Doc does get hit pretty hard tomorrow morning, you can switch this out for pure physical and still do a butt ton of damage. But anyway, this would be my my fourth recommendation of a solid build that you could play in the 3.13 league. Okay, so build number 5, MBX's Bleed Bow Gladiator. Now, everyone's butts just got a little bit tighter by hearing the word MBX and build, because normally his builds are absolutely insane. However, this one he actually did 2 progress iterations in this build. The first being, you know, one that you can achieve within about a day of playing the league with no in particular unique items that make the build crazy. And the second being the absolute what we expect upper echelon build of MBX. Now, the best things that I can say about this build are simply absolutely insane clear speed, very tanky, very easy to play, satisfying because of the bleed pop from the Gladiator Ascendancies, and that double down with the explodey chest later down the track is incredibly powerful. Even the early bow you don't need to do too much with. It's quite easy to get the bleeding modifiers that you need, especially with Harvest League coming back in. It's going to be incredibly good. This build was actually from 3.10. Was it 3.10, 3.11? So, you know, as an overall, it's quite a good build. Now, it's never really dropped off in power. Last league it was powerful, the league before it was powerful, but it's also not the most commonly played build either, which makes it a good build that most likely will not cop any huge nerfs. Definitely the Gladiator Ascendancy didn't cop too much out of it. Now, as you can see on screen, he's pretty much just clearing mobs on the spot, and all it really is switching between a chaining split arrow and a puncher set up between the 6-link bow and 6-link chest, and basically you hit bosses with puncher, they'll do dot, and they'll die within seconds. Now for this build, I'm actually going to consider playing this as my league starter, just because I really wanted to play a Gladiator again, and I really wanted something that was very easy to get into. I've already noted that Big Ducks has actually put together a little bit of a video, because I'm pretty sure his intention is that he's going to go for a Bleebo build as well for his league starter. But anyway, this would be the one of the better builds that I would go with if you didn't really know the mechanics too well in the game. Again, uses dot, again very tanky, again pretty reliable, and a boss killer as well, as with most of, if not all of the builds in this listing, and definitely worth having a look at as a league starter for this 3.13 league. I should also say I'll put both links and both POBs in the description below to this League Starter iteration that MBX built and the endgame iteration, so that you can see where you need to go where you need to start. Okay, so there's a fair bit of stuff to look forward to in the new league. I hope these builds get you started in what to consider. Now obviously patch notes come out first thing in the morning. Whether or not that nerfs or buffs these builds, I would consider that in some instances it will and won't. I don't consider the changes that are coming in tomorrow to be so significant that these builds will not be playable. These are pretty much tried and true builds, very easy to get started, very easy to gear, and they tend to be powerful league on league. And if you read the manifesto or the changes notations that GGG made, is they don't intentionally go out of their way to break builds but rebalance the game. Anyway, if you like this video, give me a like, give me a sub, and until next time, have a good one, and bye.